¿Qué tal amigos? Bienvenidos a un nuevo video en el canal. Estoy muy emocionado de estar nuevamente con todos ustedes, pero no me encuentro feliz, me encuentro muy enojado. Vamos a ver un video de cómo se pudieron rescatar vidas, se pudieron evitar más desastres. Ya hemos visto todo lo que pasó en el estado de Texas con estas inundaciones que han estado pasando en aquel estado de los Estados Unidos. Y bueno, vamos a ver cómo se pudieron salvar vidas, pero lamentablemente no se pudo por culpa de Noem, señores, así es, porque esta señora, por su ego, por sus reglas, por sus ocurrencias, quiere que todo esté bajo su control y que ella dé la última palabra de todo. Y ella frenó la ayuda que estaba proporcionando FEMA o FIMA, pero ella quería una aprobación personal y esa aprobación la dio 3 días después, donde ya había pasado todo el desastre. Así que bueno, vamos a ver este video. Quédense porque va a estar muy bueno, va a estar muy interesante y vamos a ver también las declaraciones de Christina. Adelante.
We have brand new reporting on what was happening with the emergency response in Texas, both at the local level and at the federal level, as the floodwaters raged and in the hours and days after. As the sun is starting to set on Texas Hill Country, exhausted recovery crews are closing out their fifth day doing the painstaking work that you see here, wading through the devastation to find people and loved ones who are still missing tonight. The death toll now stands at 120 people. Many of them we know are children. Those who survived are recounting just how fast and furious the water moved in.
And the screams is what haunts me. Every time I close my eyes, I hear people screaming. They were coming, walking this way, and my husband kept yelling at him, "Throw me your baby, throw me your baby," so he can save the baby. Just that. And then a wave came and it took him.
As that grueling search goes on and more stories like that are coming out, we're getting new reporting here tonight at CNN about the federal response. And CNN has learned that the response from FEMA was actually slowed by efforts to constrain federal spending. The Homeland Security Secretary, Noem, oversees FEMA, and she recently put in place a sweeping rule that every contract and grant over $100,000 requires her personal sign-off before any of those funds can be released. Officials at FEMA have told CNN that, in essence, that order has stripped the agency of much of its autonomy at the very moment that its help is needed the most. For example here, sources inside the agency are telling CNN that officials were ready to get urban search and rescue teams in position when the water was starting to rise on Friday. But a new rule that was put in place by the secretary required her personal sign-off first. That sign-off, multiple sources told CNN, didn't come until Monday, more than 72 hours after the flooding began. A DHS spokesperson responded in part with this, saying, quote, "FEMA is shifting from a bloated, DC-centric deadweight to a lean, deployable disaster force that empowers state actors to provide relief for their citizens." We're going to get a live report on the ground in Texas, but I'm first joined on this new reporting by Deanne Criswell, who is the former FEMA administrator under President Biden. And Administrator, just given your expertise on this and on these new rules that have been put in place to rein in federal spending, which obviously we know has been a big goal of the administration, but when you're actually on the ground in a moment like this and making those split-second decisions, what roles would something like this have meant for you in a moment like the floods in Texas and as that's happening?
Caitlin, I lived by one very simple principle, and that is time is our most precious commodity. You can never get time back. And so the quicker you can move resources into an area, even before you know the extent of it, then the easier it's going to be able to support those state requests for assistance immediately. What happened, I think, here is that we couldn't move, or FEMA couldn't move those resources in like they normally would to be on the ground ready once they found out how bad the situation was. And you lose time. And that's time that can cost lives in the end. And so it's really important for emergency managers to always be proactive and thinking ahead and getting resources in place. If you don't need them, great, we'll turn around, we'll send them back. It's better not to have them not to need them and have them than the other way around.
Can you just put in perspective, $100,000 obviously is a lot of money. And so when someone reads that, they say, okay, well, that's a pretty large expense. But if you're operating from FEMA's perspective, typically or sometimes these responses can soar into the billions of dollars, depending on just the severity of them. If you're inside FEMA, does that seem like a small expenditure? Is that a pretty small thing that you need to get the Secretary of Homeland Security's sign off for?
When it comes to responding to a disaster and starting the recovery, there's very little that the federal government in general supports in those situations that's less than $100,000. And so what it does is it takes away the one critical aspect that FEMA has, and that's the agility to move fast. We don't ever want to be late to need. And so now with this added layer of approval that's out there, it just makes it harder for them to be proactive, to think ahead and get resources in place ahead of time.
So do you think this red tape would have slowed down a response and from your experience of running FEMA?
So when I was at FEMA, we would have had teams moving on Friday, and they would have been in place, staged, waiting for the state to say, yes, I need them, or no, I don't need them. And so they had to wait until Monday, from what I understand, to even be able to move them, where they would have been moving on Friday and they would have been in place even before this approval came through on Monday.
President Trump has said that he wants to see states weaned off of FEMA. He said this before what happened in Texas. I tried to ask him yesterday if he still feels that way and wants to see that happen, and he said he would tell us later. But we have seen the Secretary, Noem, who at a cabinet meeting in March, I believe, said that she believed FEMA should be eliminated. She's repeating those calls tonight, saying that this essentially should be something that's out of the federal government's hands and in states' government's hands. I want everyone to just listen to what the Secretary said in her own words.
Federal emergency management should be state and locally led rather than how it has operated for decades. It has been slow to respond at the federal level. It's even been slower to get the resources to Americans in crisis. And that is why this entire agency needs to be eliminated as it exists today and remade into a responsive agency.
What would you say to that?
A core principle of emergency management, Caitlin, has always been locally executed, state managed, and federally supported. FEMA does not run these incidents. They never have. And they come in only at the request of the state in order to support them when it exceeds their capacity. When we look at a state like Texas, the most capable state probably in the country, that also needed to ask for assistance, first through state-to-state mutual aid and then FEMA, if they need that kind of assistance, what is that going to say for every other state or small jurisdiction out there when they have a big event and they don't have the federal government that they're used to depending on? We can't ask states to replicate everything that the federal government can provide. They just won't be able to do it. And so you need to have a federal agency that is responsive, gets in there fast, like they would have been there sooner, and be able to sit side by side with that state director. Again, Caitlin, changes need to be made, mostly in the recovery. Part of that recovery process is long and cumbersome, things that frustrated me. But we need to do it smartly. We need to do it in partnership with states, tribes, territories, local jurisdictions to understand what truly needs to happen in order to be able to deliver the way the American people need it.
How do you judge the federal government's response so far in Texas? I mean, obviously we have this reporting on what FEMA officials are saying they experienced from two very well-sourced reporters here at CNN tonight on this. I just wonder, though, from your perspective since Friday, what you've made of what you've seen, and if you think that they've done a good job or if there's room for improvement in your view.
Well, first, I just want to give credit to the Coast Guard. They did such an amazing job in those first few hours after the flooding in rescuing hundreds of people. The Coast Guard is one of the best partners, not just with FEMA, but always with state and locals. And they always come in to help them when they have incidents like this, even if they don't reach a presidential disaster declaration. And so that needs to continue to be augmented. And I know that the women and men of FEMA are ready to support. There's people on the ground. There's not as many as I would would have put on the ground, but I know that they're working closely with those state officials, those local officials, to make sure that they are going to get the resources that they need to help with this recovery process.
Deanne Criswell, thank you for joining with your expertise tonight. Really appreciate you.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Now, I mentioned that we're learning more about what happened, not just inside the federal level, but also inside the local level, as the questions about the response and what happened in the hours as these floodwaters were rising continued. Officials in Kerr County, Texas today have been defending their response and detailing how they managed to save hundreds of people in the first hour of that flash flood emergency, as we saw it playing out on the morning of July 4th.
Door to door, waking people up, convincing them that yes, the floodwaters are coming.
Bien, señores, pues ahí estamos viendo las declaraciones, sinceramente muy lamentables por parte de Kristi Noem. Me da mucha vergüenza que esta mujer esté a cargo de ese cargo político tan importante. Ya hemos visto cómo esta mujer ha intentado en múltiples ocasiones defender la pobre narrativa de estar queriendo eliminar a esta pues dependencia, esta organización de FEMA, que es responsable de todos estos desastres naturales que existen a lo largo y ancho de los Estados Unidos, ya sean tornados, tsunamis, huracanes, inundaciones y cualquier tipo de cosas. Hemos estado viendo cómo esta mujer, Kristi Noem, ha estado queriendo eliminar a esta organización que sin duda ha estado siempre al servicio de todos los ciudadanos. Y bueno, Kristi Noem quiso frenar todo este tema solamente para ahorrarse unos cuantos dólares. Sinceramente, esto va a estar acabando su carrera porque no puede ser que por este tema, ahorrarse unos cuantos dólares, se perdieron muchas vidas, se perdieron vidas importantes. Todas las vidas son importantes, se perdieron vidas de niños, señores, hay que dimensionar eso. Y lo estaba viendo aquí con la ciudadana, o sea, quería salvar a un bebé y no se pudo. Hay que dimensionar todo esto, lo que está pasando, y realmente es muy triste que gente como Kristi Noem prefiere que por su ego prefiere que todo se ralentice y que todo esté en la palabra que ella decida, en el modo que ella lo diga, en el momento que ella diga, y no importa cuánto se tenga que estar ahorrando, no importa cuánto tiempo tenga que llegar a salvar a la gente, lo importante es que todo pase por sus manos. Ese es el ego que tiene esta gente y están cobrándose vidas de personas inocentes y están perdiendo la vida niños. Esto es muy terrible y esto estoy seguro que va a haber un juicio de rendición de cuentas de Kristi Noem y el Congreso la va a hacer partícipe de ello y la va a cuestionar sobre todos estos temas. Pero bueno, señores, hasta aquí el video. Me encantó estar nuevamente con todos ustedes. Estuvimos parando un poquito las intervenciones de la rendición de cuentas a Pete Hegseth, pero en el próximo video vamos a retomarlo, pero sin duda este era un tema que yo quería platicar con todos ustedes. Pero bueno, señores, suscríbanse, es totalmente gratis. Comenten qué les pareció este video, qué es lo que opinan sobre esta medida totalmente fallida por parte de Kristi Noem. Así que bueno, estoy seguro que en el paso de estos días o en algunas semanas el Congreso la va a hacer rendición de cuentas. Les mando un abrazo y los veo en el siguiente video. Bye bye.